"You'll never inherit anything," my father screamed at me at 17, after I told him I wouldn't follow his legacy of lying for profit. He said I'd regret it when I was living in a gutter. Last month, he collapsed in the middle of a shareholders meeting. When they called me to take his seat, I said, "Tell him his gutter son is now CEO." The boardroom went silent. Honestly, it feels weird typing this out while drinking my third coffee of the day, but the craziness with my father has reached a point where I need to document it somewhere. Maybe for my own sanity, maybe because I still can't believe how things turned out. Buckle up, this is going to be a wild ride. Growing up, my dad, Lawson, wasn't exactly Father of the Year material. He ran this regional distribution business that did pretty well, not rich enough for a yacht, but comfortable enough for a nice house in the suburbs and annual family trips to Florida. Here's the thing. I always knew something was off about how he operated, the way he'd end phone calls when I walked into his home office, how he'd laugh about another sucker who signed while scrolling through contracts on his laptop. Little things that didn't click until I was older. When I was 16, I started helping out during summer breaks. Dad was pumped, kept talking about the family legacy and how I'd take over someday. At first it was basic stuff, filing, inventory counts, whatever. But by 17, he started bringing me to client meetings. That's when the mask came off. The first red flag was watching him promise a local business owner that their shipment would arrive by Thursday. Guaranteed. Literally the moment we got back to the car, he called the warehouse manager and told him to push it to Monday. When I asked about it, he just shrugged and said the client wouldn't notice until it was too late to back out of the contract. It wasn't just one-off incidents. This was his entire business model. He'd inflate numbers. He'd use cheaper materials than specified. He'd overcharge for rush services that weren't actually rushed. And he expected me to not just witness it, but participate in it. Edit. Looking back, I think he was trying to make me complicit, so I couldn't later claim moral high ground. The breaking point came during my senior year of high school. Dad had this big client meeting, and beforehand, he handed me a folder with what he called the real numbers and told me to memorize them for when the client asked questions. I flipped through it and realized it was basically a cheat sheet for lying. Projected earnings doubled. Resource costs halved. Complete BS. I couldn't do it. Just couldn't. Maybe it was teenage rebellion. Maybe it was actually having a spine. But I handed the folder back and told him no. Dad didn't get mad right away. That's not how he operates. First came the confusion, then the persuasion attempts. He tried explaining how everyone does this, and it's just business, and other toxic boomer logic. When that didn't work, he switched to the classic guilt trip about family loyalty. Still refused. That's when he lost. We were in his home office, and I swear the neighbors 3 houses down probably heard him. He went full nuclear, saying I was ungrateful, naive, that I'd never make it in the real world with my Boy Scout attitude. The kicker was when he got right in my face and screamed that I would never inherit anything from him. Not a penny, not a client contact, nothing. Said I'd regret it when I was living in a gutter, while my sister Everly, who always played along with his games, would be running the company. My mom Joan tried to play peacemaker, but Dad was too far gone. He actually took my house key and told me I had until graduation to figure out where I'd go, because I wasn't welcome under his roof afterward. So I did. Applied for every scholarship I could find. Got a decent one to state, not full ride, but enough to make the student loans manageable. Found 3 roommates and a crappy apartment. Worked at a coffee shop mornings before class and a bar on weekends. It was brutal, NGL. Meanwhile, my sister Everly was getting the red carpet treatment. Dad paying her full tuition at business school, setting her up with industry connections. The works. Mom would secretly meet me for lunch sometimes, always with an envelope of cash she'd saved from her teaching job. I'd try to refuse, but she'd insist, saying she was still my mother regardless of Dad's tantrum. Honestly, there were nights I'd be up at 3 a.m. finishing assignments after an 8-hour bar shift, wondering if I'd made a massive mistake. Could have just played along, gotten my degree paid for, secured my future. But every time I'd see industry news about companies getting sued for the exact shady stuff my dad pulled regularly, I knew I'd made the right call. After graduation, the real struggle began. Every entry-level job in our industry seemed to require connections, which was code for your daddy knows somebody. Meanwhile, Everly was already in a junior executive position at Dad's company, posting Instagram pics from business trips to Chicago and Denver. Applied to 137 jobs before landing something barely related to my degree. The pay was trash, but it was something. Shared an apartment with 5 other guys, lived on ramen and canned tuna, used free Wi-Fi at the local library because we couldn't afford internet. Literal poverty grind. But here's where it gets interesting. About 3 years in, I started making a name for myself. Not because I was brilliant or anything, but because I was the guy who actually delivered what was promised. No bullshit. No last-minute surprises, just honest work. My boss noticed, clients noticed, got promoted twice in 18 months. Meanwhile, through the industry grapevine and my mom's updates, I heard Dad's business was expanding. New locations, bigger clients. On paper, they were killing it. But I also heard whispers about high employee turnover, clients jumping ship after initial contracts, regulatory close calls. When I was 26, I got headhunted by one of Dad's competitors. They didn't know about our connection different last names since Mom had kept her maiden name and I'd taken it after the fallout. The irony was too perfect. I took the job. Now I had a front row seat to the industry's view of my father's business. It wasn't pretty. They had a reputation for delivering fast and cheap, but everyone knew the quality was suspect, and their numbers were creative at best. Several former clients had come to our company specifically to get away from Dad's tactics. Last Christmas, Mom convinced me to come to family dinner. First time seeing Dad in almost 8 years. He acted like nothing had happened. Classic narcissist move. Asked about my job, and I could see his face change when I told him where I worked. He tried to recover, making some joke about the competition, but I saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. That night as I was leaving, he cornered me in the hallway, told me I could still come back to the family business if I was tired of playing small time with his competitors, said Everly could use my help now that she was handling major accounts. I just smiled and said I was doing fine on my own, thanks. The look on his face, part disbelief, part anger, was almost worth the years of struggle. Found out later from Mom that he'd gone ballistic after I left, ranting about how I was probably feeding information to his competitor. Ironic, since he was the one with the shady tactic, not me. Over the past year, I've climbed higher in my company, now managing my own team, handling key accounts that, funny enough, sometimes put me in direct competition with Everly and Dad's business. We've won more than we've lost, not because we cheat, but because clients are starting to value transparency over quick fixes. Last month, I got a LinkedIn message from one of Dad's former executives who jumped ship. Said they wanted to talk. Over coffee, my 4th of the day, they told me Dad's company was facing serious issues. Client exodus, potential investigations into some contractual discrepancies, cash flow problem, all catching up at once. And then last week I got the call that changed everything. It was Everly, sounding stressed in a way I'd never heard before. Dad had collapsed during a shareholders meeting. Heart attack. Serious one. She was at the hospital with Mom. Before I could even process that, she hit me with it. The board wanted to talk to me. Like, immediately. They needed someone to step in while Dad was recovering, and apparently, the majority shareholders weren't confident in Everly's ability to handle the crisis. Turns out, Dad had been telling people for years that I was gaining valuable outside experience before eventually returning to take my rightful place in the company. Complete fiction. His way of saving face about why his only son wasn't working for him. So now the board thinks I'm the prodigal son who's been groomed from afar, getting diverse industry experience to bring back to the family business. I've spent 9 years clawing my way up from nothing after he threw me away like trash. 9 years, proving I could succeed without his lies and shortcuts. 9 years waiting for the moment when he'd have to acknowledge I wasn't in the gutter he predicted. And now, the universe has handed me the perfect opportunity for the revenge I never thought I'd get. Tomorrow morning, I'm meeting with the board. They think they're getting the solution to their problems. What they're actually getting is the reckoning that's been 9 years in the making. The gutter son is coming home, but not to save Daddy's legacy, to dismantle it. Anyone else ever have the chance to prove their toxic parent catastrophically wrong? How did you handle it? Update. Wow. Just wow. The response to my first post was honestly unexpected. Woke up to hundreds of notifications while nursing my morning coffee. Still the cheap stuff. Old habits die hard. Before I get into what happened with the board meeting and everything that followed, I need to catch you all up on the years between being kicked out and that fateful call about my father's collapse, because trust me, the revenge dish I've been cooking got a lot colder and a lot more satisfying. During that time, here's the thing, when you're told you'll amount to nothing without someone's help, proving them wrong becomes more than a goal. It becomes an obsession. After college, those first few years were brutal. My apartment's heating worked maybe 3 days a week in winter. My car, a $900 death trap I bought off Craigslist, needed repairs I couldn't afford. So I took the bus in freezing weather. Ramen packets were literally dinner 4 nights a week. Not the fancy kind either. The 25-cent ones that taste like salted cardboard. Meanwhile, I'd see Everly's posts on Instagram, business trips, new car, fancy restaurants. Mom would call every few weeks, always carefully avoiding direct mentions of Dad, but dropping hints that he'd ask about me in roundabout ways, as if he cared, as if he wasn't just checking to see if I'd failed yet. The turning point came when I was 28. After grinding for 5 years at my company, I'd moved up from entry-level to team lead. Not spectacular, but respectable. Then one day, my direct manager called me into his office. I thought I was getting fired. Anxiety brain never really goes away when you've been homeless adjacent. Instead, he told me that a client had specifically requested me for their project. A big client. Turns out, one of the smaller clients I'd helped the year before had been acquired by this major player, and they remembered how I delivered exactly what was promised, on time and honestly. No BS, no overpromising, just solid work. That project led to more requests, more responsibility, a raise that finally let me move out of my shoebox apartment with 5 roommates into a slightly larger shoebox with only 2 roommates. Progress, right? Then I met Rosalie. She was consulting for one of our clients, sharp as a tack and zero tolerance for corporate doublespeak. First time we had a meeting, she called out my presentation for being too optimistic on 3 projections. Not in a mean way, just matter of fact. I stayed after to revise the numbers with her, and we ended up talking until the cleaning staff kicked us out. 3 years later, we moved in together. Our apartment had functioning heat and a dishwasher that mostly worked. Living the dream, I guess. Rosalie knew about my father, of course. Hard not to when I'd wake up in cold sweats after dreaming about being back in his office, 17 again, with him screaming in my face. She'd never push, just listen when I needed to vent. She did suggest therapy once, but on my salary? Yeah, right. Mental health is for people with good insurance or rich parents. I had neither. Industry events were always awkward. Our region isn't huge, so occasionally I'd run into people who worked with my father or sister. They'd always do a double take when they saw my name badge. A few even asked if I was related to Lawson Chase. I got good at the bland smile and the practiced line that yes, we were related, but we'd gone different directions professionally. What I wanted to say was that he was a lying scumbag who disowned me, but networking etiquette frowns on family drama. Thanksgiving 4 years ago was the first time I saw my father face to face since the disownment. Mom had been working on me for months, saying life was too short and family should try to reconcile. I finally agreed, more for her sake than anything else. Walking into that house felt like stepping into a time machine. Same furniture, same smell of Mom's cooking, same framed family photos on the wall, though I noticed the ones with me in them had been moved to less prominent positions. Dad acted like nothing had happened. Classic narcissist move. Asked about my job as if he was genuinely interested, not secretly hoping I'd admit to failure. When he found out I was working for his competitor, his eye did this little twitch thing. You know that moment when someone's pretending to be happy for you, but they're actually furious? That energy was radiating off him like heat from a furnace. The whole dinner was excruciating. Everly talking about her executive position at Dad's company. Dad bragging about their expansion into 3 new territories. Mom trying desperately to keep the conversation neutral. Me stabbing my turkey with perhaps more force than necessary. After dinner, Dad cornered me in the hallway. He had the audacity to suggest I come work for him, as if the last decade hadn't happened, as if he hadn't thrown me out like trash. I declined, of course, politely, because Mom was within earshot, but firmly. The look on his face was interesting. Not quite anger, more like confusion, as if the script he'd written in his head, where I'd come crawling back, begging for his acceptance, had suddenly been rewritten without his permission. I left early, claiming Rosalie wasn't feeling well and needed me. In reality, I just couldn't stomach another minute of his smug face. Honestly, that night changed something in me. Before, I'd been driven by the need to prove myself worthy, despite his rejection. After seeing him again, realizing he was still the same manipulative person, my motivation shifted. It wasn't about proving my worth anymore. It was about outlasting him, outperforming him, watching his empire crumble while mine grew stronger. The next few years were a slow-burn revenge fantasy playing out in real time. Through industry connections, I started hearing things. Dad's company was expanding fast, too fast. They were underbidding competitors to win contracts, then cutting corners to maintain profit margin. High employee turnover, client complaints swept under the rug. The same old playbook, just on a larger scale. Meanwhile, I focused on building something sustainable. My team's reputation for straight dealing meant we kept clients longer. We grew more slowly, but on solid ground. Last year, I finally made enough to buy a small house, nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom fixer-upper with a leaky roof and outdated kitchen. But it was mine. No landlord, no roommate. Rosalie moved in, bringing her impressive collection of houseplants and zero tolerance for my tendency to leave coffee mugs everywhere. Mom started calling more frequently. At first, I thought it was the usual catch-up, but gradually her tone changed. She'd drop comments about Dad working too hard, not taking care of himself, how Everly seemed stressed all the time, how the atmosphere at the company Christmas party felt tense compared to previous years. Then, 3 months ago, Mom called unusually late on a Tuesday. She never calls after 8 unless it's an emergency. She told me Dad had been to the doctor. High blood pressure, high cholesterol, signs of heart disease. Doctor wanted him to step back from work, reduce stress. Dad, of course, ignored the advice completely. If anything, he was working more hours, more frantically. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not concern, just nothing. That's what happens when someone spends a decade telling you that you're worthless. Eventually, you stop caring if they live or die. Is that harsh? Probably. But it's honest. 2 weeks later, I got a LinkedIn message from someone I didn't recognize. Turned out to be one of Dad's former executives. They wanted to discuss some industry matters over coffee. Intrigued, I agreed. The meeting was eye-opening. Dad's company was in trouble, serious trouble. They'd expanded too quickly, taken on too much debt. Several major clients had left after quality issues couldn't be hidden anymore. There were whispers of financial irregularities that might attract regulatory attention. And Dad was doubling down on all the worst practice, growing more erratic and demanding as the pressure mounted. I asked the obvious question, why tell me? The answer was unexpected. Apparently, Dad had been telling people for years that I was gaining valuable outside experience before eventually returning to take my rightful place in the company. Complete fiction. His way of saving face about why his only son wasn't working for him. So now several board members and key investors believed I was the prodigal son, being groomed from afar, who would someday return to save the family business. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. Then last month, everything accelerated. Rosalie and I were in the middle of dinner, takeout because our kitchen renovation was stalled due to a plumbing issue, when my phone rang. Everly's name on the screen. We hadn't spoken directly in over a year. Something was wrong. Had to be. Everly wouldn't call me otherwise. Dad had collapsed during a shareholders meeting. Massive heart attack. He was in the ICU. Mom was falling apart. And here's the kicker. The board was calling an emergency meeting to appoint an interim leader while Dad was incapacitated. They wanted me, not Everly, who'd been there for years, playing by Dad's rules. Me, the outcast, the failure, the one who was supposed to be living in a gutter. Everly sounded desperate. The company was already in trouble before Dad's heart attack. Now it was in free fall. She admitted she couldn't handle it alone. Dad had kept too many things close to his chest, made too many promises she couldn't fulfill. She actually asked me to help save what our father had built. I told her I'd think about it. That night I couldn't sleep, kept going out to our back porch, staring at the stars, turning the situation over in my mind. Rosalie found me there at 3 in the morning, wrapped me in a blanket, and asked what I was thinking. I told her the truth. I was thinking about burning it all down. All those years of struggle. All those nights, wondering if I'd made a mistake by standing up for what was right. All those moments of doubt, when I saw Everly's success built on Dad's lies. It had all led to this perfect moment of opportunity. I could take over. I could see exactly what was broken, and I could decide whether to fix it or finish breaking it. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. I spent the night reviewing everything I knew about Dad's company. Strengths, weaknesses, vulnerabilities. By morning, I had a plan, not to save the family legacy, but to reshape it in my image, or destroy it trying. Walked into that boardroom in my only good suit, slightly too big because I bought it on sale 3 years ago and never had it tailored. Everly was there, eyes red from crying or lack of sleep or both. Several older men in much more expensive suits. They all looked at me like I was their salvation. They had no idea what was coming. I sat at the head of the table Dad's seat and smiled. And then I told them exactly who I really was. Not the prodigal son waiting to return. The son who was thrown away for refusing to lie. The son who built his own reputation on the exact opposite principles that this company was founded on. The son who was supposed to be in the gutter, but instead was now sitting in the seat of power. The boardroom went silent. Then I laid out my terms. If they wanted me to step in, it would be with complete authority. No restrictions, no second-guessing, and certainly no maintaining the status quo. They were desperate enough to agree? That was 2 weeks ago. Since then, I've been systematically pulling back the curtain on years of my father's deception. The books are worse than anyone realized. The client relationships more damaged. The corporate culture more toxic. Dad is still in the hospital. Conscious now, but weak. He knows I've taken over, but not what I'm doing with his precious company. Not yet. Tomorrow, I'm going to visit him for the first time. I'm going to sit beside his hospital bed, look him in the eye, and tell him exactly what his gutter son has discovered, and what I plan to do about it. Anyone who's confronted their abuser after years of separation, how did you handle it? Did you find peace, or just more anger? Did revenge taste as sweet as you imagine? Update 2. Honestly, I've rewritten this post like 5 times while drinking what must be my 10th coffee today. Some things are just hard to put into words. That hospital visit yesterday? It wasn't what any of you predicted. It wasn't what I expected either. Life rarely follows the script we write in our heads, does it? Before I get into what happened in that hospital room, let me backtrack to the morning after I took control of Dad's company. Woke up at 5 a.m. with a stress headache that even my strongest brew couldn't touch. Rosalie found me scrolling through financial spreadsheets on my laptop at the kitchen table, still in yesterday's clothes. She just sighed, made her own coffee, and asked if I'd slept at all. I hadn't. Here's the thing. When you suddenly have access to the inner workings of a business built on lies, the rabbit hole goes deeper than you could ever imagine. Dad's company wasn't just cutting corners. It was basically a house of cards held together with spit and wishful thinking. Creative accounting doesn't even begin to cover it. We're talking about contracts that promised deliverables that were physically impossible, loans secured against assets that barely existed, and a corporate culture so toxic that HR had a template for handling employee breakdowns. Edit. And yes, for those asking in the comments of my last post, Dad was 100% committing fraud. Not the kind that lands you in minimum security rich people prison, but the kind that skirts just close enough to legality that expensive lawyers can argue your way out of it. That first week was chaos. Walked into the office every morning to find another financial landmine. Everly hovered around, torn between helping me understand the mess and defending Dad's vision. The executive team was split, half relieved someone was finally acknowledging the problem, half terrified I'd expose their complicity. One guy, the CFO who'd been with Dad since the beginning, actually came into my office, closed the door, and offered me a special set of books that would make more sense than the official records. I just stared at him until he shuffled awkwardly out, cleaned out his desk the next day before the forensic accountants arrived. Oh yeah, I brought in forensic accountants. Day 3. Best decision ever. The board freaked when I told them, started mumbling about family loyalty and discretion. I reminded them that they'd given me complete authority, then showed them the preliminary findings, enough red flags to decorate a communist parade. Their faces went from indignant to panic-stricken in about 30 seconds flat. Suddenly, nobody was questioning my decisions anymore. Mom called every day that week, asking when I'd visit Dad in the hospital. I kept making excuses, too busy sorting out the company mess, meetings I couldn't reschedule. You know the drill. Truth was, I wasn't ready. Needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with before facing him. By day 10, I had a clear picture. The company wasn't just in trouble, it was potentially weeks away from complete collapse. Dad had been robbing Peter to pay Paul for years, using new client deposits to fulfill old contracts, promising impossible timelines to win bids. Classic house of cards. His heart attack couldn't have been more perfectly timed. If he'd stayed at the helm another month, there might not have been a company left to save. Not that I cared about saving it, not at first anyway. My original plan was simple. Expose everything, let the whole thing burn to the ground, dance on the ashes. But then, I started meeting the employees, people who had mortgages, kids in college, parents in nursing homes, people who had no idea their paychecks were being signed with magic ink, people who would lose everything if the company folded overnight. That complicated things. Don't get me wrong, I still wanted Dad to suffer, still wanted him to watch his precious legacy crumble. But I didn't want 200 innocent people to become collateral damage in our family drama. So I adjusted the plan. Instead of burning it all down immediately, I'd rebuild it, transform it, make it unrecognizable to him, but functional, ethical, sustainable. A company he'd hate, but couldn't argue with. Then I'd make him watch as I dismantled everything he stood for. The first changes were brutal but necessary. Cut the executive team by half. Anyone who'd actively participated in the shadier aspects of the business was gone. Restructured every department, called every major client personally to explain that timelines and deliverables were being recalibrated to reflect reality, not fantasy. Lost 3 big clients immediately. Expected that. 5 more put us on probation. Also expected. But 7 expressed relief that someone was finally being straight with them. Turns out, clients appreciate honesty more than false promises. Who knew? Everyone except Dad, apparently. Everly was a complicated piece in all this. She'd been Dad's right hand for years. But as I dug deeper, I realized something interesting. She'd been kept in the dark about the worst of it. Dad had compartmentalized the business so effectively that even his golden child didn't know how bad things really were. When I showed her the actual numbers, she went through all 5 stages of grief in about 20 minutes, ending with a string of curses that would make a sailor blush. After that, she became an unexpected ally, still defensive about Dad as a person, but clear-eyed about the business disaster he'd created. She knew where all the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking, and wasn't afraid to point me toward the worst offenders on staff. 2 weeks in, the bleeding had slowed. We weren't stable yet, but we weren't in freefall either. The forensic accountants had compiled enough evidence to make it clear that serious restructuring was our only option. The board, now appropriately terrified, rubber-stamped everything I proposed. That's when I finally agreed to visit Dad in the hospital. Mom was waiting in the hallway outside his room. She looked smaller somehow, worn down by worry, hugged me tight, whispered that she was proud of me for coming, asked if I was there to make peace. I didn't answer that. Walking into that hospital room was surreal. Dad was propped up in bed, hooked to monitors, looking 10 years older than when I'd last seen him. His tan had faded to a sickly gray. His usually perfect hair was flat and dull. For a second, just a second, I felt a flicker of something that might have been pity. Then he looked up, saw me, and his eyes hardened. Whatever weakness his body was showing, his spirit was unchanged. The same calculating, manipulative man who'd thrown me away a decade ago was still very much alive behind those eyes. He tried to sit up straighter, maintain some dignity, asked what I was doing there in a voice that was weaker than I remembered, but still carried that edge of command. Before I could answer, he followed up with a question about how the company was doing, not how I was doing, not an acknowledgement of our history, just concern for his precious business. That's when any lingering doubt about my plan evaporated. I pulled up a chair and sat down, told him I knew everything. Everything. The fake projections, the impossible promises, the shuffling of funds, the threats to employees who raised concerns, the clients who'd been systematically misled for years. His face changed as I spoke. First denial, then anger, then something like desperation. He tried to interrupt, to explain, to justify. I just kept talking, laid it all out in clinical detail. By the end, he was clutching his chest monitor so hard I thought he might trigger another heart attack. Then I told him my plans for his company, completely restructured, ethically managed, transparent with clients, fair to employees, everything he'd fought against for decades. His face went red, then purple. The monitor beside his bed started beeping faster. He managed to sputter out that I couldn't do this, that I didn't understand business, that I'd run his life's work into the ground, that I was naive and stupid and ungrateful. I just smiled and reminded him of what he'd said to me 10 years ago, that I'd never inherit anything from him, that I'd end up in the gutter, that I wasn't worthy of his legacy. Then I leaned in close and told him that his gutter son was now CEO, and his legacy was mine to reshape as I saw fit. The look on his face was worth every second of the past decade's struggle, pure, undiluted horror. The realization that not only had I survived without him, I'd thrived, and now I held the power to destroy everything he'd built. He started yelling then, weak, raspy yells that probably couldn't be heard beyond the door, but furious nonetheless. Called me every name in the book, threatened to fight me in court, swore he'd recover and take back control. I just sat there, letting him exhaust himself. When he finally ran out of steam, slumping back against his pillows, I stood up, told him the board was behind me 100%. The books were being audited. The business model was being completely overhauled, and there was absolutely nothing he could do about it. As I reached the door, he called out one last desperate play, said that if I valued family at all, I'd protect his reputation. For Mom's sake, for Everly's sake, if not for his. I turned back and told him I'd protect the company. I'd protect the employees. I'd protect the clients. But his reputation? That was beyond saving. And frankly, I had no interest in trying. Left him there, monitors beeping frantically, nurse rushing in as I walked out. Mom was waiting, tears streaming down her face. She'd heard enough through the door to understand what was happening. She didn't try to stop me, though. Just asked if this was really necessary. I told her the truth, yes, it was. For me, for everyone he'd hurt, for the company itself. The next 4 weeks were a blur of 16-hour days, endless meeting, tough decision. Everly and I fell into an unexpected rhythm. She handled client relationships while I restructured operations. We weren't exactly friends, but we were effective partners in the controlled demolition and rebuilding of Dad's empire. The board went from skeptical to cautiously optimistic as the first signs of stabilization appeared. Two of the clients who'd left came back when they heard about our new transparency policies. Employee morale improved as the culture of fear dissipated. We were a long way from profitable, but we were no longer actively hemorrhaging money. Dad was released from the hospital 3 weeks after my visit. Went straight to his house, not the office. Mom said he spent most days watching business news and making angry phone calls that went nowhere. His former allies had abandoned him once they realized which way the wind was blowing. His doctors had ordered him to avoid stress, which meant he couldn't even fight me directly without risking another heart attack. The psychological torture of watching from the sidelines as I transformed his company was apparently unbearable. Mom said he'd rage, then fall into depressed silence, then rage again. His carefully constructed persona, the brilliant, tough businessman who'd built something from nothing, was crumbling before his eyes, replaced by the reality of a fraud whose house of cards had finally collapsed. Yesterday marked 1 month since I took over. The forensic accountants delivered their final report, a devastating document that laid bare every questionable decision, every ethical lapse, every financial sleight of hand. I had a choice to make: use it as a weapon for total destruction, or as a tool for targeted reconstruction. I chose the latter, not out of mercy, but pragmatism. Going nuclear would hurt too many innocent people. Instead, I'm using the findings to surgically excise the cancer Dad had cultivated while preserving what actually works. Called a company-wide meeting yesterday, announced the completion of our transitional assessment, and outlined our path forward. Made it clear that the old way of doing business was dead and buried. We'd be smaller for a while, more focused, more ethical. Some might not like the new direction, and they were welcome to leave. Most stayed. Some even looked relieved. After the meeting, I found Everly in her office, staring out the window. She asked if I was doing all this just to hurt Dad. Fair question. I told her the truth. It started that way, but it had evolved. Now I was doing it because it was the right thing to do. For the company, for the employees, for myself. She nodded, then asked the question I'd been waiting for. Was I planning to stay long-term, or was this just about revenge? I hadn't actually decided until that moment. The words just came out. I was staying. This was mine now. Not because it was Dad's, but because I'd made it mine. Rebuilt it in my image. Created something I could actually be proud of. Last night I drove to my parents' house. Dad was in his study surrounded by papers, attempting to build some kind of case against me, no doubt. He looked up when I walked in, eyes narrowing with suspicion and lingering anger. I put a folder on his desk. Inside was my complete plan for the company's future. Transparent, ethical, sustainable. Alongside it, a letter outlining exactly 2 options for him. Option 1, fight me, lose, and watch as the forensic report becomes public record, destroying what remained of his reputation and potentially leading to legal consequences. Option 2, step back permanently, take his retirement package, generous but not excessive, and allow the company to move forward under new leadership. My leadership. He stared at the folder for a long time. Then, without looking up at me, he asked why I was doing this. Was it just to hurt him? To prove him wrong? I told him that 10 years ago, he'd tried to teach me that business success required lying, cheating, and moral compromise. He'd been wrong, dead wrong, and now I was going to prove it by building something better from the ruins of his failure. Then I left. No dramatic exit line. No further explanation. Just walked out and drove home to the small house I share with Rosalie, where the dishwasher still leaks and the living room needs painting, but everything is mine, earned honestly. This morning my phone buzzed with a text from Everly. Dad had called her at dawn. He's taking option 2. So that's it. The gutter son doesn't just have a temporary seat at the table, he owns the whole damn table now. The company will survive, transform, hopefully thrive, not as Dad's legacy, but as mine. Mom called an hour ago, asking if this means I'll be part of family dinners again. I told her I'd think about it. Might take Rosalie to meet them properly someday. Might not. The company connection is unavoidable now, but family? That's still complicated. Dad made his choice 10 years ago when he decided his son was disposable. I made mine when I decided his legacy wasn't worth preserving, but the livelihoods dependent on it were. Sometimes the best revenge isn't burning everything to the ground. It's rebuilding something better on the same foundation, forcing your enemy to watch as you succeed where they failed, using the very principles they mocked you for upholding. The gutter turned out to be a pretty good place to learn what really matters.